What is up, Station? Javier Mercedes here for yet again another Passion and Progress show where we talk to inspiring individuals and hopefully through hearing their stories, you too are motivated to go out and pursue your passions. And on today's show, we do have somebody that knows a thing or two about brewing beer. And I do not know anything about that. In fact, in preparation for this podcast, I was hearing the word microflora and I was like, I don't even know what that means. So I'm really curious and I'm super pumped for this podcast. We are here on the outskirts of Austin, Texas with the co-founder of Jester King, Jeffrey Stuffings.
Yes.
How's it going, man?
Thank you, Javier. Great to see you as always, man.
Yeah, awesome to see you. So what's the difference here with your farmhouse ale, and how does that differ from what people, when they go to a supermarket and they might see all of the different beers? I know you guys do something really different here.
We do. So yeah, I mean, you named it farmhouse ales. You know, what is a farmhouse ale? You know, to us, that is a beer that is connected to a place, a time, and a people. You know, beer that's unique to its surroundings. You know, for instance, when we go to make beer, we try to just really embrace all the inputs around us. You know, the water straight from beneath our feet, the grain that's grown in our region, the hops that we age in our barn, and most importantly, the microflora, the yeast and bacteria that naturally occurs around us. That's what it is.
Yes. Okay, so can you give a good explanation of what microflora is?
There's these individual creatures all around us. You know, they're microscopic, and they've helped sustain human life on this planet for millennia. You know, just the individual microbes that engage in the process of fermentation. You know, taking a big step back, beer making is probably 10 to 20,000 years old, and humans have only had an understanding of what microscopic life actually is for about 150, 200 years. And so there's naturally occurring yeast and bacteria everywhere around us, and when it's exposed to sources of fermentable sugar, it breaks down sugar to create alcohol, carbon dioxide, and a whole host of flavors and aromas. And so what we do is really hearkening back to the way fermentation in beer was done historically, which is borrowing the individual creatures like from the air and from the land. And when you do that, you don't have as much control over the beer making process, but you do have a unique connection to place. The winemakers call it terroir, meaning that sense of place, that connection to the land, the air, the ground. And so if there's really anything that ties our beer to the surrounding environment, it is the wild yeast and bacteria that's all around us, also known as the microflora.
So tie that into what you guys do here. And from my standpoint, as I understand, it's each beer per year is going to taste maybe a little bit different, or correct me if I'm wrong.
That's exactly right. So, you can draw a strong analogy to what we do to the wine world, where there's going to be seasonality, where every, vintage is going to be a little different. Now, we're not working with, one harvest I shouldn't say that. We are working with oftentimes just one harvest per year. We oftentimes do kind of, melding or hybrids of beer and wine, where we take the beer that was aged in our cellar, and then we, for instance, will, add some of the fruit from the latest, whether it be grape or peach or apricot harvest from the Texas Hill Country, and embracing the microbes that are on the skin of the fruit to create interesting flavors and aromas through fermentation. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of just kind of natural variation. Most beer is going to be highly engineered, where you are basically bending nature to your will to create something that's going to be exactly the same every time. And that's not a bad thing at all. But as a farmhouse brewery, I think there has to be that connection to our land and our air and our environment, and letting those kind of drive the car. We're kind of in the passenger seat when it comes to making beer. We're going to let nature kind of steer the direction it goes, and then ultimately decide if what nature produces is worth sharing with our customers. So I oftentimes refer to what we do as a partnership with nature. For instance, a farmer isn't going to just plant his or her crops and say, okay, September 25th, that's when I'm harvesting. It's going to be patience and waiting for nature to ultimately dictate the results. And then when you feel they're at their best representation of what it is you're seeking to create, then at that point kind of harvesting. So that's kind of how it is with our beer. We let nature kind of dictate where it goes. And when we feel it's in a state that is exciting for us to share, that's when we kind of harvest, so to speak, and then share what we make.
Yeah, you mentioned patience. And I think that is a very big attribute to what you do here. And can you explain the process of spontaneous fermentation and how much patience you need in order to pull that off?
Yes, I would. As far as I'm aware, it is really the most patient form of beer making, where you're just allowing the ambient yeast from the night air ferment the beer. This is one of the oldest forms of beer making on the planet. The process is quite simple. We use this vessel, which is called a cool ship. It's a large open air, basically a trough. Ours is made of copper, and we wait for a cold night of the year. Being in Central Texas.
That doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We have maybe 10 to 20 nights a year. But for a small brewery like us, that's okay, because we can still get, 1 or 2 dozen brew days in, and that's fine. So we fill the cool ship up with unfermented beer right about this time of night, like 7:00, sun's going down, it's starting to cool off. And then we open the windows and then let the night air just start flowing into the room and letting the individual, creatures that are in the night air, the microflora, to come into the room, land in the cool ship, and then just inoculate that unfermented beer with just, millions of little microscopic yeast and bacteria that then will ferment the beer on its own. It's almost like magic, because the beer just almost magically or on its own transforms from sugary water to beer. And again, this is the way all beer would have been made. The first beer, we can only assume, was probably when someone left some grains sitting out overnight in a vessel, and it rained and they became soggy, and just some of the naturally occurring enzymes converted starch into sugar, and then the wild yeast from the air transformed it into beer, and someone was brave enough to drink it, and that became history. So what is spontaneous fermentation? It's just relying on the ambient yeast from the air to create the beer. Again, these microbes are everywhere, and they want to find sources of fermentable sugar. Like for instance, if you just go home and were to put a glass of, let's just say, fresh squeezed orange juice on your kitchen counter, it will attract airborne yeast, and it will turn into orange wine in a couple weeks. I can't promise you it's going to be
really
pleasant to drink, but it will turn into wine just that simply because these microbes are everywhere around us.
And then getting to the patience part.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. The fermentation is remarkably slow. For the first, let's just say, year, we hardly even bother tasting the beer. I mean, you can make really great beer in like 2 to 3 weeks. So this is a very large departure from the way most beer is made in the modern context. So the beer goes through weird stages, weird transformations. It can be like very astringent and bitter and acrid, and even develop any kind of even sort of weird textures and off flavors and aromas. And sometimes the beer does not recover from that, but
he has a very, you can tell the look on his face is very much like we've had to dump a lot of beer because of this.
We have. Yes. Yeah. I would say of historically, and I don't know the exact number, I would say 25% of our beer we've had to just send down the drain for precisely that reason. Is, when you strike a partnership with nature, and seed a high degree of control in what you do, it's not all going to work out. What we do find with our spontaneous fermentations is after about 18 to 24 months, you do start to see a nice kind of mellowing. You see kind of interesting, kind of fruity, funky flavors, almost like, fruit, instead of being like bright and fresh, fruit that's maybe slightly over the hill a little bit, starting to become a little bit more funky, or yeast character that instead of being, totally like bright and fresh, is maybe a little bit more like barnyardy. Like, for instance, like people will age wheels of cheese on wooden planks for years, and you get kind of that funk. So we're kind of doing a beer equivalent of that. And you also see naturally occurring acidity, where the bacteria creates tartness, which, for me, lends to drinkability. Kind of that acid can kind of cut through some of the layers on the palate there and really make a beer that's very balanced and pleasant to drink. And, again, drawing an analogy to wine, which we often do, there's natural acidity both in our beer as well as wine. And I think, it creates a harmonious blend at the end of the day.
And then Getting back to patience, how many years does it take?
I would say, so for our spontaneous beer, our average age is going to be about 24 months. We do typically a blend of the 3 prior vintages. So, for instance, like the beer we're serving right now is our 2018 blend, which is going to be beer from 2017, 16, and 15 all blended together. So so the total kind of lifespan or the ages that went into that blend are approaching about 4 years. So as far as beer making goes, to my knowledge, I've never really encountered more of an exercise in patience than doing spontaneous fermentation.
Man, I can't imagine. Well, I'm sure people in the wine industry deal with this on a day-to-day basis and a year-to-year basis, but I can't imagine putting the investment in for something like that and just knowing that, I don't know, 2 years down the line, you might dump something. How long? What's the longest that you've held on to something and then you're just like, I don't want to let it go, but it's just not going to come back?
Yeah, 5 years was the longest, and
you held on to something for 5 years.
Yeah, and it was so close. It was right on the brink, but then just didn't make it. Yeah.
Oh man,
yeah.
I bet that was a sad day.
Yeah, it was because we kind of we were a little too patient because there was a period where that beer was pretty good in pretty good shape, and we're like, oh, a little longer, it's going to become more harmonious, and then
you're gambling. Yeah, I love that you're gambling with making beer. That's exactly. Oh wow. Such a great concept. I want to keep talking about the formalities of the business and everything, but I want to take it back to the beginning. Your origin story of how you got into this, because I know you were practicing law beforehand.
Yes, as you mentioned, I was a lawyer for a number of years, and I think what kind of led me in that direction was I was a government major in college, and thought I wanted to kind of go out in that vein and, change the world and get into elected politics, or at least like help in that area and kind of.
Your major was in political science, wasn't it?
It was, yeah, exactly. And so I, headed down the path, kind of this very kind of more traditional tried and true path. And then ultimately got very kind of disaffected from that world and, just a lot of negativity in that environment and just a lot of just kind of very like staid, like black and white, just, I don't know, an environment that wasn't very creative or expressive, and wanted kind of to get out of that world and do something totally different. Meanwhile, homebrewing was my passion.
Can you give a context of the year?
Yeah, so this would have been 2007.
Because I think when a lot of people listen to this, they may not know that. I mean, the craft brewing boom, this was before that, I believe, correct?
Yeah, I mean, there was really not very many breweries at all at that point in time, especially in Texas. There was, when we opened, the Houston Chronicle said we were the 12th brewery in Texas to open at the time. Mm-hmm. And, now there's about 300. So like it's just mushroomed dramatically. And a lot of that growth happened from roughly 2013 to 2016. That was more or less the heart of this boom. So yeah, it was, a little bit of an underground thing at the time. I
want to say, at that time, would it be safe to say that things like Blue Moon or Sam Adams were considered the craft brew at that time?
Yeah, I think that is fair. Like, that and like, okay. Sierra Nevada, so,
practicing law. Blue Moon is considered a craft brew.
Yeah.
Continue story.
I developed a love of home brewing, which basically one of my classmates in law school handed me a beer, and he said, taste this beer. What do you think of it? And I'm like, this is great. I think it was an Oktoberfest style, and like it was really delicious. And he's like, yeah, I brewed it. I'm like, what? Like you can do that? And yeah, I know, right? Yeah, it blew me away, and I thought that was just the coolest thing. So I started getting into home brewing around the same time. It's when I arrived here in Austin, and immediately went out and got a kit from the local homebrew store, and then very quickly it was something I was doing. Like 3 or 4 nights a week, like coming home from work, dog tired, but I still had enough energy to like go and brew beer because.
Were you still practicing law at this time?
I was, yeah.
Okay.
And that actually continued on for quite a bit of time. It was a good, almost like 3 years that I was just kind of like patiently working my garage, trying to sculpt recipes, trying to come up with the ideas for what we'd ultimately make here at Jester King. But still obviously, needing to hold down a job just to, get by. but ultimately reached the point where I felt I was ready. I had spent a lot of time working on a business plan, a lot of time just trying to perfect recipes that we'd ultimately scale up. And kind of when that, still measured by a ton of fear, but when there was enough kind of confidence where like this could work. That's when, I put in my notice at the law firm where I worked and struck out to raise money, not in hindsight, not even a ton of money relative to like, a lot of startup costs today, but, raised about, $400,000 to open a brewery.
I don't want to graze past this because I feel like there's a lot to be held in the fine tuning of how you did that, because I feel like that's a lot of money, especially for the idea behind what you wanted to do in a time where things like Blue Moon or Sierra Nevada are considered the smaller breweries at that time. You probably put together a business plan that was like rock solid, and when you approached investors, they were like, man, this guy's rock solid with what he wanted to do. What were some of the key things that you wanted to stand by and that led people to invest in you?
Yes. So, I saw really writing a business plan is really demonstrating to people that, you're competent and can be trusted to do well by their money and their faith in you. I almost kind of saw it as like an auditioning or like an interview process where, I wanted to translate to people that, this person is serious. He has done his homework. He knows how to read, write, and think, and can be trusted as a first-time entrepreneur, with my money. So, you mentioned, authenticity before, just trying to show people that like, this is legit. Like I've gone through the steps to know what I'm talking about, even though I've never owned or started a business before. And then also part of it was the faith in that, like, there is an opportunity here. Like, I feel like if you're going to go out and ask people to put their faith in you and to put their dollars into your vision, you need to authentically believe in what you're doing. And I felt like, being in Texas in 2008, 2009, and looking around and seeing this state that had, in the major metropolitan areas, about 25 million people, but meanwhile, we're like 48th in the nation in breweries per capita, that there's going to be growth. There's going to be an opportunity here. And I felt very strongly in that. And then putting the data behind it, like doing the math, making it in a clear, coherent, non-overbearing fashion, like detailed, but not like overwhelming either. And maybe that was a little bit like the lawyer in me, which is like giving a closing argument, like, on some level, keeping it very simple, but on another level being compelling and backing it up with the data. And so, I approached it as, making the case for why I should be trusted with what felt to me like a, big sum of money, 6 figures of money for, again, a first-time entrepreneur. So
that's quite the feat.
Yeah.
I know it's a long time ago, but that's still like really cool, man.
Oh, thanks, Javier. Yeah.
There's one question I want to ask. Is it true that in order to talk to the people that had the funding, you were able to get to the alumni in the email list in Notre Dame?
That is correct. So
can you tell the story behind it?
Absolutely. So I failed to mention, I'm going to take, like one little step back to set it up. So, my business partner is my brother, Michael, who, by the way, he spells his last name differently. He spells it Stuffing with an E instead of Stuffings. I think he was slightly embarrassed by our name growing up, and so he changed it. So he was, or is, very technically savvy. He was a physics major. He was the kid at home taking apart, the VCR, back in the, late 80s, early 90s when we were growing up together. He was the kid, I'd be inside, playing video games, and he'd be outside, like looking at the stars with like the telescope that like he built, stuff like that. And so I knew, because, I have had some creative chops and some business chops, that I needed some like technical engineering, like science help. Because I knew that like me trying to put a brew house together by myself, like you give me like a kit, I can make a great beer. But if you ask me to like do the plumbing, do the electrical, do the propane, all that stuff, I'd be like, I'm screwed. I can't do this. But he has those skills, and plus he's my brother, and so there's a high degree of trust there. So I felt like he was my perfect business partner. And thankfully, this is 2008. The financial markets are melting down. He was working for a bank in Chicago doing investment banking stuff. So he was kind of happy to, leave that world at that time. So he comes down and, I'm like, okay, Michael, we've got this good business plan. I think we've got, test beers or prototype beers.
You were pitching this in 2008?
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people were saying
wow.
Yeah.
That's a little fact that was left out. Dang.
Yeah.
But, continue.
Yeah. That was very intimidating actually when, we're getting just about ready to put our plan in front of investors. And meanwhile, some of the biggest banks in the world are either going under or just on total, hold because stuff's melting down. So, that was intimidating, but so Michael, I I'm a Notre Dame alum like your brother. And, when you're at Notre Dame, part of the indoctrination is they tell you about kind of the power of the network there, which is very true.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, how do we tap into this network? And, my idea is okay, I'll just start, calling some folks, maybe setting up some coffees or whatever. And
yeah.
Michael's like, I'm going to hack into their alumni database on their website, just lift all the email addresses. And then he targeted it for the greater Austin, Dallas, and Houston areas.
That's amazing.
And I after having quit my job and gone through all the time and effort to try to get this business started, I must admit I was not above spamming the entire Texas
alumni.
And so we did. And I don't know what our quote hit rate was, but all of a sudden we had roughly 15 people knocking on our door saying, tell us more. And ultimately we were able to parlay that into a significant piece of our funding. So it worked.
Love that.
Yeah. We only, actually Notre Dame did send us I thought we'd get more heat for it. All we got was really just a, please don't do that again, letter. That was
Wasn't it that, I don't know if you got blacklisted or something like that, but then they did they put you on some sort of list hey, stop doing this? And then lo and behold, many years down the line now where you're at, you got a whole page spread in the alumni, whatever that is. Can you explain it a little bit?
Yeah. So I think, kind of one department or hand wasn't talking to the other because right around the time, I think the Alumni Society was saying don't do that. Was the same time the Notre Dame, they're called the Irish Angels, the VC or a group for Notre Dame invited us to come present at their annual conference. So yeah, it was.
So you were in their bad graces and also in their good graces at the same exact time.
Yeah. So
awesome, man.
Yeah, I would do it again.
I love that. I love hearing stuff like that because I forget who I heard this from, but there's certain ways to go about when you're an entrepreneur and you're pursuing the business that you want. And I forget the analogy, but it's something where if you're in a line to go into a nightclub and there's all the people that are in the line to go into the nightclub waiting to get in, and then that's the normal way of doing things. But then there's always those people that can find their way in the back way. And I feel like those are the ones that are always the most successful. And I feel like that's a good story. That's the finding the way and how do you get all of these little pieces to fall into place to then pursue your dream.
Yeah.
I think is really cool.
Yeah. I mean, I think it certainly takes a scrappiness. My modicum has always been do no harm, which is a relative comment. To me, technically breaking the rules. I'm what's the worst that can
on an
happen?
Email spam.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a certain degree there, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So do no harm. Make sure that no one's life at all ends up in a worse place. And for me, but otherwise, do what you have to do to get it done. And
yeah,
what I find valuable, and again, that was my brother's idea, not mine. But what I generally find very valuable, especially, and this is a bit of a tangent, but especially this information age where through devices we have just constant bombardment of info, pinging us all the time. I find value in just taking the time to put the devices away and just sit down in a comfortable, quiet space and just think and just let your mind just kind of have an idea in mind of a problem or an issue or a challenge, but nonetheless, just like let your mind just kind of like gel around that for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and just kind of see where it goes. And I found that very valuable over the years to like come up with ideas how to solve issues that are, holding you back from whatever it is you're trying to do.
Yes, very true. Sitting down with a pen and paper, writing something at the top of the paper, like thinking about it. I couldn't agree more. I think my version of that is going on walks, spending time outside,
Yes.
and then going and walking for like 45 minutes before I start my day. But I think where that could end up compounded over time is something not to be grazed over. The ability to have the audacity to not look at your phone, not get sidetracked by other things. Because, I mean, if you're running a business, obviously there's always going to be something that can draw you into the trenches. But when you have those higher level problems and you have the time to really designate to thinking about them, like
Exactly.
it can go so much more. You got the funding, you come down, and I know it's during recession time, and you start, like, what did you do? Did you, like, you got the land and then you just like out here with backhoes? What's that look like?
Yeah, very, very similar to that. So we raised the capital, and then this was one of those kind of lucky breaks, I suppose. Maybe 80% luck and 20% of us, fighting hard to get our name out there, trying to build a brand even before we even had a location. But we, started, engaging pretty heavily. We're not trained marketing professionals, and we're to this day trying to become more effective marketers. But, we started a blog, started telling our story very early on. That's always been important to us, is to like tell a story, have something to say, have a unique voice out there in whatever space you're in. So we started to tell the story of Jester King and farmhouse ales and our inspiration, again, before we even had a location. And we were very fortunate that the Austin Chronicle, our main independent or kind of more cult following publication, did a story on us. And that was very advantageous because a rancher right on the outskirts of Southwest Austin here saw that story, was compelled enough by it to reach out to us and say, hey, y'all sound cool. I like what you're talking about. How would you like to build your brewery on my ranch? And, we were like, oh, okay. We came out here and we're like, this could work. This is cool. Like, this has a nice, like, rustic hill country feel that kind of, ties in well with the beers we're trying to make. And so kind of from the first afternoon being out here, we're sold. And at the time we were like, wow, this is kind of like far from Austin, but whatever, this is a cool space. And now 10 years later, it's like Austin feels like it's like right there.
Yeah, because like
exactly.
For people that don't know, Austin is one of the fastest growing cities in the US. Personal question though, when you came to do this, and I know a lot of other people can relate to this, you have a wife. Were you also expecting your first kid at that time?
Yes.
Like, is it safe to assume that you still had all of the debt from pursuing your law degree?
Yes.
So, and you're taking on funding.
It was scary, to be sure. There were definitely moments, especially moments less so with like the business planning, but more so with like setbacks, with the beer we're trying to achieve. Like, I had a very strong vision for what our beer would have to be like to be successful, and, kind of taking a fair amount of like fits and stops and failures to get to there was kind of unnerving, where like, some of our first batches of beer, we probably dumped, I mentioned historically we've dumped, 25% of our barrel aged beer. Mm-hmm. That first year is probably more like 75% of our barrel aged beer.
I can't believe you had the audacity to do that. Well, I guess if it's something that you just don't want the public to have, then it makes sense. But still, that's got to be heart wrenching, especially when you're trying to get off the ground.
It was, yes, that was very scary. And some of those early setbacks on the production side were unnerving. Thinking like, can we really pull this off? Like, are we going to be good enough to do this? Because there was a lot of thought and planning, which you referenced, that went into this, but there still was the insecurity of like never having made beer professionally before. And I think there's a little bit of like a chip on our shoulder that maybe carries with us to this day, of just like only being like a true amateur in this craft and trying to prove ourselves that, we can do this. And you know, for anyone who knows as well, might be thinking, what are they talking about? Like, you know, they've developed a great reputation over the year. You know,
that just didn't happen overnight, though.
Yeah, no, you're certainly right. But yeah. Actually, I must admit, I'm not sure where I was going with that.
So from my standpoint, looking at where you're at now today, it can be very easy to say, hey, they're Jester King. When you come to Austin, Texas, you should go check out Jester King and all those things. But like I said, that doesn't happen overnight. And I think a good testament to what you guys have done is the way that your brand presents itself. And it's not, I just got done reading this book called Primal Branding. And in it, they talk about the idea of there's so much that you want your entity, just not even just a brand, but just who you are and everything as a culmination of all of your enterprises, what you want that to be. And there's only so much that you can do to put that out into the world and what that showcases as an opinion for other people to see. But then when it's out in the world, it's everybody else's opinion. Like, all right, this is what we actually think of Jester King. And I think you guys have stuck to your laurels so much that that's what's contributed to where you're at today.
I agree. Yeah. Just I mean, thank you. I mean, yeah, just having a core philosophy, a core set of principles, exactly. and sticking them, you know, through change, like being adaptive. Like, you know, we, you know, the way we pursue beer is certainly not the way it was 10 years ago, but having nonetheless a core set of principles that we just consider non-negotiable. And, you know, going back to, you know, again, you hit on such a key important word like authenticity. Just be honest. Tell people who you are, what you believe in, why you're doing what you're doing, why you're not doing what things you're not doing, and just letting people ultimately decide, is this something I choose to embrace, or is this something that maybe I'm not into? And that's okay, because, you know, I remember one of the essays I read very early on. I think it's fairly well known. It was I think the name of the essay was 1,000 True Fans, meaning that if you can it was actually in the context of the music industry, saying that if you can convince 1,000 people to buy every album you make, go to see you in concert every time you're in town, and be like a true believer in what you do, that's enough to be sustainable. And, you know, we're a brewery that, you know, only makes, you know, 2,000 barrels or, you know, i.e., you know, 60,000 gallons a year. And 60,000 may sound like a big number, but believe me, that's practically nothing. That's the same size of a brewery that like a restaurant would be.
Would you know how much like somebody like Anheuser-Busch would push out, just to give context to that?
Yeah, so about 165 million barrels, multiply that by 31. So we're talking, you know, close to like 1 billion gallons.
So 1 billion gallons versus what was yours?
60,000.
So there you guys go.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're extremely small. And if you're going to be small, that affords you the ability to, I think, truly be yourself in what you do and be sustainable. I mean, we don't make nearly the cash that a multinational like Anheuser-Busch would make, but we're successful enough to be able to employ, you know, roughly 60 people, and to, you know, be able to afford, you know, a little plot of land out here on the outskirts of Austin that we can, you know, keep a rustic green space for people to enjoy with their family and friends.
With the plot of land, what you guys are doing here, can you get into the litigation that you were part of? I know the story, but I don't know how to phrase the question in a way that you couldn't sell beer here.
Yeah. And
can you explain that to the listeners? Because I'm coming from this from a position of, if somebody that hasn't heard of Jester King. Yeah. So I just love how you guys were a part of where Texas is at right now. So can you explain part of that story and how you were how you affected the the laws for selling beer here?
Absolutely. So when we started in 2010, it was completely illegal for anyone to buy a single glass or bottle of beer here at the brewery. Like you can,
and were people coming?
Yes.
To check you out. So what did you guys do?
We would say, you know, there's a liquor store or gas station down the street that has our beer. You can buy it from them. We can give you a taste for you to sample. We can sell you a t-shirt, but we cannot sell you a drop of beer. And that was a big it held us back significantly when it came to being a profitable business. I mean, we just barely scraped by.
And why is that? Yeah.
So it all comes down to margins. Like when you sell your beer into the distribution channel, you're essentially sacrificing roughly 50% of your margin. The distributor is going to take roughly 25%, and the retailer is going to take roughly 25%. So, a $10 bottle of beer, you're seeing $5 on. Now, if you are able to sell that beer at your brewery straight to the customer, you're seeing that full
taking out the
margin.
middleman.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. So that was illegal. Texas is a big beer state. It's one of, by virtue of its population and its love of beer, is one of the biggest beer consumption states in the country, which has naturally attracted some of the biggest distributors in the country. For instance, the biggest Anheuser-Busch InBev distributor in the country is called Silver Eagle. They're out of Houston. And being a multi-billion-dollar corporation, they control a lot of political power. So they've been able to more or less over the years get their way, so that they had basically set up the laws where the small brewers could not sell anything on site, and they had to go through their channels.
And then comes somebody that knows a little thing or two about law.
Oh, well, I have been part of the overall struggle to modernize our beer laws. Myself, as well as some of the other breweries in Austin, as well as our guild, as well as the consumers who have been pushing for better beer laws. We were able to achieve some deregulation through, yes, we did. You mentioned litigation. We did sue the state over essentially beer freedom when it came to the First Amendment. Like when we started, you could not call a beer if it was over 5% alcohol. You had to call it malt liquor or ale. So it created this weird thing where like your pale ale could not be labeled as a beer if it was under 5%. So just like weird things that made no sense. You could also not tell someone where your beer was sold at the time. Like if someone came up to us and said like, where can I find your beer?
Like, I can't tell you.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
That makes no sense.
Not at all. So we ended up filing a First Amendment freedom of speech claim in federal court. And we're successful. The judge sided with us, and now we can tell people where our beer is sold. We can call it beer regardless of alcohol content. So that was a significant breakthrough. But even more meaningful was not the legal success we had, but the legislative success we had. Where in 2013, our legislature, again with us, other breweries, our guild, pushing it forward, we broke through, and for small brewers who make under 10,000 barrels a year. Again, we make like 2,000. Those brewers could now sell beer on site, and that was just night and day difference. We went from essentially breaking even, scraping by, to actually turning a decent profit margin, basically by overnight. And to this day, yes, distribution is a moneymaker for us, but far and away, people coming out here, interacting with our servers, interacting with our tours, experiencing this place, experiencing the beer in this place, creating those 1,000 true fans, if you will. Like that is our bread and butter. People spending time, sitting under a live oak tree, experiencing beer, taking some beer home if they like it. That is what sustains us. And that was only legal 3 years after we started. And then finally bringing us to just like a month ago, now, after another almost a decade of struggle, all brewers in Texas can sell their beer to go on site. So we finally, there's still a few laws that are crappy, but we've finally broken through for the most part.
And just to give context to the listeners, and I think I heard this beforehand, but what number state was Texas to adopt that law?
50 out of 50 in the United States.
So the very last state in all 50 states was able to adopt the idea that, hey, you can sell beer out of your brewery.
Yes. Texas, it likes to label itself as very, very small business friendly, very free markets. But when you get into it, depending on the industry, there are some powerful players that tend to get their way. And not to sound negative, but that's just one of the sad realities of business. But finally, finally we broke through.
Talk to me about that business model then, because for me, when I was looking from afar and knowing what you were doing here, I was still living in Atlanta, and then I knew Stuffings is over in Austin doing the Jester King thing here, and then whenever we would come, we would always come and check it out, and it's always awesome to see the growth that's happened over the years. But I was always interested in the business model that you have of it's more profitable to bring people to where you're brewing the beer than distributing it out to the masses. And to me, I would be in Atlanta, and it lends itself to the scarcity of what you guys do and how rare it is to come across the beer. Because just knowing you a little bit, I know whenever I would see Jester King anywhere in Atlanta, I'd be like, I need to buy that right now because I know the person that did the thing with the things. And then I would proceed to tell everybody around me about what you're doing here. Why is that? Why is it that you have scaled back and it's so much more profitable for you to do it here? And I know that's the what you talked about with the margins, but from an outsider's standpoint, myself included, I always think about why don't you just create more? Why don't you send it to more people and that whole thing? What has scarcity done for your business?
So I think where that really starts, Javier, is with going back to some of the original comments this evening, what we're seeking to do, and that the time and patience that goes into it. Yeah. So we've basically chosen a niche or a style of beer making, a process, a technique that lends itself to being small volume. Again, that kind of analogy to the wine world where, we're not a brewery. You could probably make the argument that it would make more sense for us to rip out all of our barrels, all of our oak, pack our space to capacity with stainless steel tanks that touch the rafters and brew on the most efficient cycle possible. And probably, we'd make more money doing that. But, going back to authenticity, that would make us a zillion other breweries. And that's bad. But coming back to, if you're going to spend all the time and effort, it's kind of, I follow politics still, even though I'm not in that area. Elizabeth Warren in the Democratic debate said if you're going to spend all the time and effort to run for president, why don't you go for something? And that's kind of how I feel in starting a brewery and running a brewery is if we're going to spend all this time and effort, have, even though it may be small and in a small little segment, have a lasting fingerprint on your world. And for us, that meant being in this little niche of hill country, Texas inspired farmhouse ales, doing something that can only exist here and, being authentic about it and making something that whether you like it or hate it, you have to admit, if you're being totally honest, that it is unique. And so that was very compelling to us. And that has naturally kept us small somewhat by design and somewhat by happenstance. So when we are small, it means that, we're patient. We don't make that much beer and we really can't just try to dominate a market. That's never been our MO. So we're just kind of on the outskirts, working with those 1,000 true fans, as I mentioned, and doing something, very, very, very small and kind of kept us out of being able to grow as substantially. And I know, I think I've lost a little bit the root of your question there, but no.
I think it's very powerful because I just wanted you to explain why you guys stand by what you do. And in and of itself, I think that this is a destination when people come to Austin personally, and you guys own the restaurant here right now too, right? Yeah. So, this isn't I'm not being paid to say this, but I think it's the best pizza I guess in Austin, outskirts of Austin, wherever this place may be. But straight up, if somebody were to come to Austin, the very first thing that I would say is you should go to Jester King. I mean, if they're of drinking age and things like that. But the very cool thing is, if you're a family, it's also very awesome because you can come here and you can frolic. You can go check out some goats. You can go take a tour of the farm and all that kind of stuff. It's very powerful.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the coolest things, and maybe I'm biased in saying this because I'm 40 years old now and have 2 kids who are quickly growing up, but it was always important for me for the space to be a place where families could feel comfortable. And I think this is not just us, but a big trend in the craft beer world right now is breweries kind of becoming community hubs, places for people to hang out of all ages. I love bars and all, but there's kind of a stigma where don't necessarily bring your kids to the bar.
Yes, yeah.
But I think breweries kind of buck that trend a little bit. And I think that's a positive thing. I mean, we're a for-profit business. I'm not trying to say we're on some, noble crusade, although we do try to do right. But if I look at what, as far as the cultural fabric of, the greater Austin area, do we help provide? We're not alone, but do we help provide is a place that fosters community. There's a reason why, and sometimes, when it's Super Bowl Sunday, I kind of wish we had TVs here because it's like a ghost town here. Mm-hmm. But there's a reason why we don't have TVs.
Yeah.
And that is because and this again goes back to my comment about kind of devices and technology, which I love and embrace. I'm not knocking, but in terms of balancing that, I think one of the most wonderful things about not just our beer, but beer in general is it fosters, I think, community like no other beverage. There's a reason revolutions have been fostered around beer.
Yeah, for sure.
It's because it's a way to, without, being, three sheets to the wind or under the table, you can talk to people for 3 or 5. I've done it. I'll have friends who come out and we will sit out here for 6 hours, just going way deep in conversation and life and just really having great bonding over beer because, again, and maybe because of its, kind of utilitarian, drink of the people nature, maybe, and I'm sure a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's not, 10 or 20% alcohol or more. It's great for creating community. And so if there's one thing that when, I'm long and gone, if people can say Jester King, helped create part of our community fabric out here in Austin, that would be very meaningful to me. That's what beer should do. That's what a brewery should do. It should be a community gathering place. And so that's what we aspire to.
That's awesome. So community, authenticity. I know there's huge companies out there. Is there a price for Jester King?
Oh, hell no. Well, I'm on record having, said this. So, I feel free to share it. But we had a very emotional period when one of our closest friends in the industry, Wicked Weed Brewing out of Asheville, North Carolina, was purchased by Anheuser-Busch InBev. And, I'm never going to fault individual business decisions that people make. That's their business. It's their prerogative. However, professionally, we had to part ways because that's just multinational breweries do not have the same agendas that small independent craft producers do. And we don't want to ally ourselves with corporations that don't share our ethics and don't really, I think, care about independence, don't care about craft. I mean, we're very close friends and supporters of a lot of other breweries out there, and it's not a zero-sum game to us. We're trying to build a category, build an industry, build a niche. And so, we're big supporters. I mean, if you look at our beer list, a lot of our close friends, we're actively pushing their beer because we support it so much. That's not what a company like Anheuser-Busch InBev is about. So we professionally parted ways. Our idea is, how can we make this place sustainable, not through selling out, but through, organic growth. And, I mentioned, fermentation is particularly wild fermentation. So if people ask me how will Jester King grow with time? It won't be by making more and more barrels of beer, but it will be through exploring other avenues of fermentation and culture. So, we have expanded into farming. We've expanded into the culinary arts and started our own kitchen. We've planted a vineyard, and I've not broadcast this through our channels, but when friends ask, what will you be making a couple years from now, it will be beer, it will be wine, it'll be cider, it may be distilled spirits, it'll be mead. If it can be fermented, we have an interest in it. The goats just wandered down earlier. We plan to make goat cheese. So if those microbes that I mentioned want to change it into a fermented food or beverage, we will do it. So there will be growth for us, but it won't be the growth that leads you to selling out.
Yeah. There's a concept, going back to the book that I just read, the Primal Branding, there's a concept that I'll talk about it in terms of Mac and Windows. If you're Mac and you say some sort of comment that is about Windows, then that will lead certain people that really love Macintosh computers to either love or hate you. So in your circumstance, the more and more that you can stand by what you actually believe in, the more and more people can get what you're about. And I think in doing that, you build those 100 or 1,000 true fans and then some.
Absolutely, Javi.
You want to keep growing. What about your family? Is it a legacy thing? Because you're doing some amazing things here. Would you ever see your kids taking over what's going on here? What's like a 50-year plan or whatever? Like not like a 50-year plan, but have they shown any interest, or would that be something that you would introduce?
That'd be a dream come true if my son and daughter wanted to, carry the torch of this place in the future. But I mean, you're a dad, like whatever their interest and fancy, takes them, I mean, the whole concept of like, when it comes to children, like unconditional love, I think is the best thing you can provide a child. Like no matter what, no matter how bad you screw up or don't screw up or whatever happens, like just know, like I will be here for you, no matter what you decide, what you do, who you are, who you are. Like, to me, that's like just the cornerstone of being a parent. So if that leads them down to, take over for me, I hope that happens.
I'm sure they'll know a thing or two about fermentation.
Yeah. I mean, they literally grow. I mean, it's funny, like, when during the construction phase, like I would just have my daughter like in a playpen, like in the corner where we're working, with heavy equipment and stuff, like, just a couple, yards away. So, I mean, or like, back in the day, like when I wore, with my brother, all the hats, I would have her like strapped into her little car seat in the back of the car. And like in the other seat, in the back seat would be like a keg, like seat belted into the car. And like, I was taken out of the bar, and like, I literally like walk into the bar, to deliver the kegs, like with her and like the little baby carrier. And
I'm sure the bar owners would understand.
Oh yeah. They were totally cool about it. And the cool thing is like when you sell your beer to other places that like truly care about beer, like they get it. Like, to them, the person showing up in the semi truck with like the, fancy gear, they're more like, you're a little weird. Like the person showing up with like their kid in tow was like, oh, you're one of us. So like, that was never uncool in any way. The short answer is yes, that would be amazing. But if not, the cool thing is like, we now being a business that's about to turns 9 this month, we've had people who have been with us now for the better part of a decade, who I've, grown to, really, love and respect. And, if ultimately it's, them who carries on the torch, that's cool too. With that said, I hope I have another, 3 decades in me, man.
Patience.
So yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Want to see that? You're gonna have like a 15-year-old barrel or something like that. That you're mixing with a 30-year-old barrel. Yeah. He's smiling because he knows it's true. One other question with that: has it been tough wearing, especially during the beginning, wearing all those hats and doing everything? At this point, has it been tough, like splitting all that time between family and all that stuff? Because personally, like when I'm making YouTube content and doing my freelance business, and then also wanting to spend the amount of time that I want to spend with my wife and kids, it's like there's always this balancing act. How has that been for you?
It's very tough. Yeah. I don't know if it's from sports, and we talked about Notre Dame, how I think it attracts a lot of like competitive people. Obviously I was a roommate with your brother, and we always wanted to just kill each other on the basketball floor or flag football or whatever it was. Like it was one of the most, like we loved each other like brothers, but it was highly, highly competitive. And so, what I battle as an entrepreneur is that feeling like if you're not working, someone else is out there working.
It's so true. You
to
just
get
put
the better
that so
of you.
well.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, and it's hard to truly relax. Like, I can take a day off, but like, sometimes I hate to say it, but like when I'll go on vacation, like, a couple days in, I'm like starting to get antsy and starting to like, man, I need to get back to it. And like, and we have a talented staff. Like the reality is like, I know I could disappear for a month, if not more, and this place would be fine. Like, but it's just, I don't know, you love being in like the mix, in the battle, so to speak. And like, you feel like at home when you're like grinding away and like, like the whole concept of, and not that I, wouldn't be interested in like, trying other things in life and pursuing other passions ultimately, but like, thinking of like being on the sidelines. Like there's a Teddy Roosevelt quote I really like. It's like the man in the arena quote, which, he says is like, to paraphrase, is like, it's not the critic who counts, it's the man in the arena who, even in defeat, still like knows the great enthusiasms of competition, who like, still like, even though beaten down, will never like have a place on the people on the sideline with like,
we're just bystanders.
Bystanders, yeah, exactly.
They were looking in. At least you tried.
Yeah, exactly. And that always really resonated with me. And so like, I have this like kind of good/bad habit where like, if I'm not kind of like in the fray doing my thing, like I get like antsy and feel like detached and kind of uncomfortable. And when it comes to family life, that can be difficult because it pulls you so much away from that, and how to truly find a better, balance. I would say I've almost moved on to the point where I'm not even trying to find balance, but more trying to like incorporate my family like into the mix where like it's all kind of one and the same.
Mm-hmm. Two things I ask everybody at the end of each podcast is, and we already talked about passion and all this thing, so maybe you already summed it up, but why do you do what you do? I
think I do what I do because of that. I mean, kind of riffing on the last response, like a fundamental insecurity of like failure. Like, I want to excel at something, and I can't entirely say why. Like, I know like the social value of what we do. I know the value it has for, our employees, my brother, myself. But ultimately, like, to be challenged as a human being. I mean, we're an endurance species. We're a survival species. Like, we're a species that like was never bigger or faster or tougher than most of the other animals in the world. But like, from what I've been able to discern, we had just a certain level of just kind of stamina, endurance, kind of stick-to-itiveness. And I don't know, I think that still calls us to, in every regard of what we do in life. And, ultimately like wanting to achieve something that is, greater than yourself. Like I've come to learn real quick that like, you can only take yourself so far. Like if you truly want to achieve, and I would say, I'm still very much learning how to do this a decade in, but like how to work in a cooperative fashion with other humans to multiply the impact of what you can achieve. And like that to me is highly interesting and highly enticing to pursue. So I don't know. I mean, I like video games too, but like I can only do that for so many hours where I'm like, I'm wasting my time. Like
Super Bowl.
Yeah. Yeah. Who your brother is one of the greatest players of all time.
To get to where you're at today, and let's say it's right when you took that first leap, you took on all that debt from law school and everything to where you're at today, what advice would you give to somebody to get to where you're at today? And I know that there's probably a lot of things that you could say, but what would you, if somebody wanted to be brewing beer as their passion, like you are today, what would you say?
I would say have kind of a clear, concise vision that's based on your own likes and interests. I mean, it's not going to be totally slanted towards like, well, I only like this, so I'm only going to make this. So not that kind of narrowly focused, but start with, and not just beer, but like whatever it is. Like, you said the magic word at the outset of this podcast. You said, what does authenticity mean to you? And I'm like, Javi, you just identified like the key word, like be authentic, like be true to yourself, and the rest will kind of, through hard work, kind of write its own narrative. So
I would like to put I'm totally cutting you off, and I don't know if the listeners are going to be mad about that, but I think part of this also keys into, if you don't know how to be authentic, just start trying to do things. Just start doing something, and you'll start to know real quick, I like doing this and I don't like doing that, so I'm going to avoid that thing. And that in and of itself helps to create your authentic self. Would you agree?
I would absolutely agree. Yes. Stand for something, have a story to tell, be totally open, like warts and all. Here's what we're good at. Here's what we're not good at. Here's what we believe in. Here's how we approach things. Be an open book. Don't try to put on a veneer of what you think people will like. Just, be yourself and that will kind of carry through as an extension to your business. And that will resonate with enough people combined with the hard work and dedication to be successful. So, I think it's just like your parents probably said when you had an issue as, an elementary school kid, like just be yourself. Just be yourself.
I love whenever I ask that question, and most of the time it's the simplest of advice. But the reason why it's these phrases or the culmination of words that a lot of people always hear is it's for a reason, because most of the time simple advice is probably the most true thing that you could hear or abide by. How can people learn more about Jester King?
Certainly, if you come to the Austin area, we are only 14 miles from the state capital, so not a far drive. So I always feel like for people to appreciate what we do, seeing it in person is the best way to
if you come to Austin, you have to come here.
Well, thank you, Javi. I mean, that means...
Well, it's true.
Yeah. No, I would agree. I think, I think we offer something unique and meaningful, and we should be on that short list of places people visit when they're here. Aside from that, we're very active on our website, blog, and social media. We don't really engage in any kind of formal marketing per se, but like we tell our story every which way we can. And now that, we brew beer, we have a small farm, we have a kitchen, there's just more stories to tell, which is kind of fun for us to do. So following our narrative, and we do send our beer out of state. We sell most of it on site here at the brewery, but we also distribute small periodic shipments to other parts of the United States, as well as occasionally Europe, and I think the farthest we've ever we sent beer to Australia once. So I think that's the farthest we ever got from here.
For me, it's analogous to catching a rare Pokemon. I don't know if anybody's ever said that, but straight up, when you see a bottle of Jester King, please treat yourself to it. If you are not in the Austin area, and it's one of those rare gems out in the wild. If you find it, please invest in some amazing beer. Thank you so much for your time, Jeff.
Oh, thanks, Javier. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, and until next episode, if you did like this episode, you could share it out with a friend. You could text it. You could also probably just handwrite the URL link in a piece of parcel and mail it to somebody. That'd be awesome. If somebody did that, please tell me, because that would be amazing. Until next episode, live a life of abundance, and I'll see you guys on the next podcast.